beginning of the 20th century. A radio signal crosses the Atlantic. The Wright brothers soar through the sky in their flying machine. Great engineering feats are underway like the Panama Canal, the New York City subway system, and the Ford Model Ts roll off the assembly lines. It is the beginning of our modern world unfolding in its primal stages, but there still remain aspects of the past that are yet to be resolved. World War I, the Great War, the war to end all wars. 1.8 million Germans, 1 million British, 1.7 million Russians, 1.4 million French, and a total of 8.5 million died in the brutal conflict, and no party was satisfied, and all were determined it would never happen again. Some that their enemies must pay a price. This is Strong Leadership, Poor Results, the Paris Peace Conference 1919. After World War I, leaders and citizens were through with conflict and ready for a change. So leaders from nearly every nation in the world came together after World War I in 1919 to Paris with the purpose of establishing a lasting international peace between nations. Some nations that attended the conference include the United States of America, represented by President Woodrow Wilson, France, represented by Premier Georges Clemenceau, Britain by Prime Minister David Lloyd George, an Arabian delegation from many different nations, Japan, and Italy, represented by its Prime Minister Vittorio Emanuele Orlando. U.S. President Wilson is a true leader at the conference, and his priority is a lasting peace for the world with fairness, forgiveness, and respect.
One point of view is we have to be more involved with the world. And this means potentially making it a little bit more lenient towards Germany and having a more balanced approach. And since the U.S. got itself involved, we should be responsible for a larger stake in things. That's the Woodrow Wilson approach.
Wilson, in his address to Congress on January 8, 1918, outlined his humanitarian, peaceful, utopian ideal and 14 points that would get the world there, including open covenants of peace, taking into account the interests of people as in a democracy, reducing national armaments, a League of Nations, forgiveness to Germany. But Wilson was only one delegate who appeared at the conference, and everyone had an agenda. Clemenceau was the delegate from France, and quite a character he was. Clemenceau fully embraced his nickname, the Tiger. In the war, he was not summoned until the French government had no other options. Clemenceau went to the front lines to boost morale, and his toughness and stern attitude led the Allies to victory. He wanted revenge against Germany, and public support was with him.
Due to previous losses in major wars, France really looked at World War I as a way of settling a score. And Clemenceau viewed it as a chance for France to get even with Germany for losing some regions, specifically Alsace and Lorraine, back in the 1870s. So when they look at the Paris Peace Conference, it was really a chance for France to get even. They weren't really looking at it being fair, more as revenge. Because for perspective, like 40 years before then, where the Treaty of Versailles for World War I, in Versailles Palace, the Germans made the French agree to a humiliating treaty, and the Germans were stomping around there in muddy boots, calling the shots. So that was a major humiliation for the French. So when at the end of World War I came around, they were kind of looking to do the exact same. Like really not about fairness, but about revenge.
So at the end of the conference, who got what they wanted? Wilson got the League of Nations, but the United States never even joined because of an isolationist Senate. The Arabian delegation asked for freedom and got nothing because France and Britain wanted control of the oil fields in the Middle East. And the Japanese?
Because they did not lose that many troops, and they got to take all of Germany's colonies in China. So really the only thing that Japan lost out on was because, in all honesty, because they were not white, the European countries did not really acknowledge their perspective on things. So they're viewed as kind of like a second-tier player, because the other countries still view them as very young, untested, and Japan.
And a lot of them were racist as well.
Oh, openly. They would not acknowledge.
Yeah.
They would not acknowledge that as what they view a third-rate, non-white power was on par with them. But in reality, Japan gained a lot of territory, and there was really no one who could have the power to fight them in Asia. And some historians will actually make the case that World War II did not begin with the invasion of Poland by Germany in 1939, but actually the invasion of China in, I believe, 1933 by Japan.
Strong leadership on behalf of France and Britain gained for their countries oil fields, territories, power, and security, knowing that Germany is in the dumps. Is it a good thing, though? A lack of public support in the United States crushes their influence over the conference. Japan in the East is powerful and angry. It seems like the perfect foundation for a second Great War. And to top it all off, the signing of the Treaty of Versailles is brutally insulting to the Germans. To shame them on the train ride in, the train went extra slow so the Germans could see the destruction they caused. At the signing, there were mutilated French war veterans sitting in the front row. The desk that the treaty was signed on was owned by Louis XIV, and the signing was in the Hall of Mirrors, where years before, the German Empire had been proclaimed.
I think everything was really laid out very clearly in the Paris Peace Conference to cause the Second World War. I mean, if you want to even consider it further, the Vietnam War was partially caused by the Paris Peace Conference because of the refusal to relinquish colonies and give them their freedom. If I remember correctly, Ho Chi Minh, who was the leader of the Vietnamese Communist Party, was at the Paris Peace Conference, and his people were denied their independence because they were told they could not govern themselves, and France needed to rule them. So it's kind of like, I hate saying like this directly caused that, but I always love using analogies. It's kind of like you create a three-legged table, and one of the legs is kind of sawed into bits, and then you increasingly put more weight on the table. You can say that the weight caused the collapse, but the table itself was made really bad. That's how I kind of view the situation. And a lot of historians, once again, and I'm one of those, insist that, honestly, World War II was basically resuming World War I, and Adolf Hitler, as well as other Nazis, made the case that they signed an armistice. And an armistice is not a peace treaty. It's basically pause. So they're untiming out. They're like, okay, untime, let's do this again. So really, World War I and II I find to be almost a continuation of a major conflict.
It is safe to say that the Paris Peace Conference was anything but a peace conference. There was a valiant effort on many sides to make things right, but the strongest leadership was on the side of harsh penalties and revenge, rather than peace and benevolence. Japan is powerful and bitter. There is no popular sovereignty in the Middle East or Vietnam, and the Germans are outraged by the treaty. Ensuing conflicts include the Second World War, Vietnam, and to this day, the Middle East. But it is not all bad. This was the first time that world leaders had come together as one to discuss diplomacy, and great strides were made along the lines of communication and cooperation. The United Nations of today may never have come about if it weren't for Wilson's ambitious dreams. After the Paris Peace Conference, the world would never be the same again.